sat on her lap till noon, and then he died. Verse 21, and she went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God and shut the door behind him and went out. So the child dies, something evidently going on with his head. I'm not sure if that's like a heat stroke of sorts or something like that, but the child does die. Then, verse 22, she called to her husband and said, "Send me one of the servants and one of the donkeys, that I may quickly go to the man of God and come back again." So she remembers who helped get the child to begin with, right? And so she is urgent, and she is persistent, and she saddles the donkey and gets things ready to roll. Verse 23, and he said, "Why will you go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath." She said, "All is well." So I want to make this observation here that sometimes the Bible will record or describe what it doesn't condone. What do I mean? She's saying to her husband, she's saying here in response, she's saying, "All is well." Well, when you keep reading, all is not well. All is not well at all. She's lost her son. So I want you to see that sometimes the Bible will record things that aren't a blanket endorsement. So the Bible, it's not saying that God supports her kind of just, not wanting to discuss this, but just moving up forward. Then, but I also want you to notice this in verse 23. It says it's neither new moon nor Sabbath. So we might pause and ask, well, why would that reference be made? Well, the Sabbath would be a day of rest, and the new moon would also be a day of rest, and it would be a time when they would typically consult a prophet. And so this, a prophet would bring a message to her. So he's wondering, why are we going today? Why do you want to go today to him? And it's not the Sabbath. It's not the new moon. Now look at 25. So she sent out and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. When the man of God saw her coming, he said to Gehazi, his servant, "Look, there's a Shunammite. Run at once to meet her and say to her, 'Is all well with you? Is all well with your husband? Is all well with the child?' And she answered, 'All is well.'" So here a second time, all is well. And when she came to the mountain to the man of God, she caught hold of his feet. So just picture her grabbing Elisha's feet. And Gehazi came to push her away, but the man of God said, "Leave her alone, for she is in bitter distress, and the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me." Elisha did not know what it was that had come over her. But she's grabbing onto her. Her soul is in bitter distress. Then she said, "Did I ask my Lord for a son? Did I not say, 'Do not deceive me'?" He said to Gehazi, "Tie up your garments and take my staff in your hand and go. If you meet anyone, do not greet him. And if anyone greets you, do not reply, and lay my staff on the face of the child." So here's one solution that is offered to deal with her child who has passed. Take the staff. Well, notice her response again. Then the mother and child said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." I'm not going away. That's essentially what she's saying to Elisha. I'm not going. You can want me to take this staff and take it. I'm not going. I'm not leaving you. She's persistent. So he rose and followed her. Gehazi went on ahead and laid the staff on the face of the child, but there was no sound or sign of life. Therefore he returned to meet him and told him, "The child has not awakened." Verse 32, when Elisha came into the house, he saw the child lying dead on his bed. So he went in and shut the door behind the two of them and prayed to the Lord. Then he went up and lay on the child, putting his mouth on his mouth, his eyes on his eyes, and his hands on his hands. And as he stretched himself upon him, the flesh of the child became warm. Then he got up again and walked once back and forth in the house, and went up and stretched himself upon him. The child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes. Then he summoned Gehazi and said, "Call this Shunammite." So he called her, and when she came to him, he said, "Pick up your son." She came and fell at his feet, bowing to the ground. Then she picked up her son and went out. Well, what had happened to the son? What had Elisha done? Yeah, restored him, right? Came back to life. And beautiful encounter. It parallels, there's some similarity here. Remember, Elisha asked for a double portion. And if we were to go back with Elijah, remember Elijah, he raised the widow of Zarephath's son. So here Elisha is raising someone from the dead as well. And Hebrews talks about receiving the dead back. Some receive the dead back. And so here's an instance, a second instance that we've looked at this week. Now I want us to think about this in terms of practical application. One take-home message that I want us to see in this is that there's something to be said about persistence. There is something to be said about insisting and determination, and that was her attitude. You ever heard mothers called Mother Bear? You ever heard of a woman who's called Mother Bear? What's that about? Be careful, right? Be careful with Mother Bear, right? Because she's going to protect her kids. And this woman is, she's making a beeline for this man of God. And she latches onto him. She's in bitter distress. And Elisha finds out why. And again, God works through Elisha to bring about a great result. And so there is something to be said in terms of being urgent, not delaying, not saying, well, we'll get around to that, putting it in a bucket list, putting it off. That wasn't this occasion. She was making a beeline for him. Now look in chapter 4 again, verse 38. And this is a miracle about Elisha in a deadly stew. So there is, look at 38, and she came again to Gilgal, and Elisha came again to Gilgal when there was a famine in the land. And as the sons of the prophets were sitting before him, he said to his servants, "Set on the large pot and boil stew for the sons of the prophets." One of them went out into the field to gather herbs and found a wild vine and gathered from it his lap full of wild gourds, and came and cut them up into the pot of stew, not knowing what they were. And they poured out some of the men, and they poured out some for the men to eat. But while they were eating of the stew, they cried out, "O man of God, there is death in the pot." And they could not eat it. He said, "Then bring flour." And he threw it into the pot and said, "Pour some out for the men that they may eat." And there was no harm in the pot. Well, what's the occasion there? They've got some wild, this individual had got some wild things and put it into this pot of stew, and it was toxic. It was toxic. So one thing you don't want to say at a potluck is, "There's death in the pot," right? So that's interesting here. They cry out, "O man of God, there's death in the pot." So how does he do it? Well, he brings some flour, and then here's this miracle where they're not harmed by what's eaten in there. Now, one final miracle in chapter 4 is in the rest of the chapter, and we won't read it there, but the occasion is Elisha feeding 100 men with 20 loaves. And so he's taking these 20 loaves of barley and fresh grain, and he's giving it to them to eat. And then he's repeating that. And so that's another instance there. I want us to look over now into 2 Kings chapter 5. And I want us to see something beautiful in the text, and that's concerning the life of a man by the name of Naaman. This is the only account in all the New Testament that is referenced with Elisha. Although if you start numbering the miracles, Elisha did more miracles that we have recorded than Elijah. Elijah's mentioned multiple times. I think it was over 40 times that Elijah's mentioned in the New Testament. Elisha's only mentioned once. And the instance in Elisha's life that's mentioned by Jesus in Luke 4 is about Naaman. And it's interesting what he brings out about Naaman. But let's look in 2 Kings 5 and read about this commander. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master and in high favor, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper. So as we kind of set the tone for this encounter of Elisha and Naaman, I want us to see that there is a great amount of teaching concerning leadership in this occasion of God's interaction with the prophet through to Naaman and Naaman's need. Now, think about this. You might ask the question, why would God have given victory to Syria? Syria would have been an enemy of Israel in the days of the judges and then later. But why exactly would God give victory to Syria? What do you think? Okay, punishing Israel. That's absolutely right. It was said in the law that if you obey God, you can expect blessings, promises, and God to be with you. But if you were disobedient, you could expect that your enemies would come against you and you would be punished. And so the Syrians do war with Israel from time to time, and Israel had fallen by the hands of their enemies. Moses had stated that in the law. But then notice this at the end of this. Syria, again, Naaman, he's a commander of the army of the king of Syria, and it says he has high favor. He was a man of valor, but he was a leper. Now, I've done some mission work in West Africa, and any of you ever seen a person with leprosy, modern-day leprosy? So a person with modern-day leprosy, there's a leper colony in Ghana, West Africa, and it's kind of out away from the capital, and they send individuals, Africans there, Ghanaians there, to this little small community. And we've gone there and seen the lepers and brought them gifts and things like that. But typically a modern-day leper would be missing digits. Their fingers might be missing. Their toes might be missing. They might have blindness and things of that nature. And so we're not sure exactly the exact type of leprosy or what it was all entailed with the leprosy of Naaman, but it was something that he could not easily get rid of. And he was a leper. And so if you could imagine having this condition and not being able to get relief from that. Now look at verse 2. Now the Syrians on one of their raids had carried off a little girl from the land of Israel, and she worked in the service of Naaman's wife. So notice the connection of children between nations. This is going to play out in an important way. Here's a child that's taken off from Israel, a servant now of Naaman's wife. Verse 3, she said to her mistress, "Would that my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." This little girl knows about Elisha and knows that the power of God is able to even work in the life of this man by the name of Naaman. If he was there, right? So her awareness of a man of God. So we think about the purity of children. We think about their simplicity. We think about out of the mouth of babes and things of that nature. So here an application could be made. She has some knowledge. She has some insight. Verse 4, so Naaman went in and told his Lord, "Thus and so spoke the girl from the land of Israel." And the king of Syria said, "Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So he went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. So here this Syrian king now is going to, on behalf of the commander of one commander in his army, he's going to send quite an entourage of gifts to accompany those as they travel in that direction. So a letter goes and gifts go as well. Now, if you flip over to the book of Nehemiah, you'll remember that Nehemiah is the cupbearer to the king. Artaxerxes is this Persian king, and what he receives is a letter as he goes back to restore the wall in Israel. This is after the Babylonian captivity. But we're here before either the Assyrian taking off of the 10 northern tribes or what comes later, the Babylonian captivity. But I want you to see there that it's quite quite an impressive amount of gifts that he's sending in that direction. I did some math, and 750 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold, and it would equate to about 600 years of labor for the common man. So this was quite an impressive gift that would accompany this letter. Verse 6, and he brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, when this letter reached